Hi Culture Warriors, I'm Jeff Vieira. Welcome to Culture is Everything. In previous videos, we've discussed what culture is. We've talked about how culture manifests itself differently depending on whether we're talking about culture as desired, as communicated, as understood, or how it's actually lived. And all of that's been kind of laying the foundation for some of the discussions that are coming up. Today I'd like to talk to you about how we start to pick apart culture and assess what it is and how it works so that we can do some things to improve it. We mentioned some key concepts in the first couple of videos I want to revisit just for a second in case you're joining us without having had the opportunity to see those videos. Recommend you do go back and watch those. Culture is the manner by which an organization's values are communicated, understood, and lived by its members. Okay, very important concept to keep coming back to. When we talk about what that is for, what does culture actually do then? Why is it important to communicate these values and to close the gap between culture as it's desired and culture as it's actually lived? And it comes down to helping the company to fulfill its purpose. Culture stems from leadership. Leadership is what defines culture, and that the purpose of defining a culture, the purpose of a culture itself, is to help the company fulfill its overall purpose. A culture is as good as an organization's values are lived, is another way to put this. Okay? So when I started writing Culture is Everything, I wrote it from the perspective of a quality professional. I've been a quality professional for over 25 years. And so that was the most relevant frame in which to do this work. It has a wider application, but for a start, my fellow quality professionals know that one of the challenges that we've really had is that we've got some terrific methodologies, we've got some great projects that have come down the pike, but where those improvement efforts run against the grain of a culture, often it leads to failure. Doesn't matter that the idea was terrific, doesn't matter that we worked as a team and came up with a terrific implementation plan. In the end, if the improvements we're talking about, the changes in behavior, will not take root so long as the culture is not the fertile ground for it. Okay, so that said, I'm going to go a little bit more specifically into the process improvement / quality realm here. But bear in mind that this applies more broadly as well. So if you're doing things in your business, if you need your business to change its behavior in other ways than those that are considered to be classically quality or business process improvement focused, that's okay. These principles will still apply. We'll come back around to that. But for the moment, just to illustrate the point and the methodology of the book, I want to get a little bit deeper into the quality sphere. So bear with me. We're fond of saying within the quality ranks that in order for quality to succeed, you must have top-down buy-in from leadership. It's another way of saying don't begin this effort if leadership is not foursquare behind it. That's very true, but it's also not sufficient. There have been many cases, the incident that caused me to write the book in the first place, as we talked about in a previous video, being one of them, where you can have that top leadership buy-in and still not be successful in the implementation because the culture itself is against it. And until the culture is squared away and the cultural foundation is placed, you're not going to get there. We talked previously about Toyota and how Toyota feels free to share remarkable detail regarding their lean production system methodology with the entire world because they know that one of the predicates for doing lean, one of the prerequisites, is that you drive out fear from the workplace, that you assure your employees that no one will ever lose their job for making us better. That runs totally against the grain of many American companies, and for that reason, Toyota is pretty confident that we're not going to be able to get the full benefit out of Lean, and we haven't. Likewise, when we talk about quality in general, there are certain behaviors that are very conducive to success in continuous improvement. Okay? One of these is empowerment. Can your frontline employees make decisions that are relevant to their job and to the business processes that they're following to do those jobs? Where the answer is yes, that tends to be a good area for quality to take hold. Where the answer is no, employees simply do as they're told, decisions are made at the level above them, then that tends not to be as good a place for continuous improvement. So in the book, I provide a model that you see here. What determines cultural readiness for process improvement? We have two main questions. Number one, how are decisions made? And under that question, I have three sub-questions, three follow-on questions that help characterize that a little bit further. How do we make decisions? That comes down to who makes decisions, what types of information are valued in making those decisions, and where does that decision-making authority tend to come from? Okay, so three sub-questions under how are decisions made. I'm going to flesh those out in a moment. Our second question, second major question is, how is change viewed? If you talk about continuous improvement, you're implying more or less constant change. Generally speaking, when we talk about continuous improvement, we're talking about small incremental changes, many of them made throughout the organization on an ongoing basis. Okay? So for underlying questions for that, we ask, how frequently should we change? The more frequent, generally the more conducive it's going to be to do process improvement. How much should we change? Here's where you get a little fork in the road with regard to different business process improvement methodologies, but generally speaking, quality as a whole tends to favor minor incremental changes rather than major sweeping changes, simply because you have to have some sort of standardization of work. People have to be able to come in the morning and kind of know what their day is in order to get many of the benefits of process improvement, particularly in the area of statistical process control. Which stakeholders determine the need for change? This is very important because you get into some situations where a change may be internally directed, which is the favored approach of most quality methodologies, or it could be externally directed. And so we like to distinguish between those two. Okay, so 6 questions in total when you get right down to it to really determine if your culture is ready to take full advantage of a process improvement approach. Okay. So let me unpack what we do with this information by giving you an example. When we talk about the decision maker, who makes the decisions in your organization, we tend to have a spectrum. Okay? At one extreme, for example, we could have a company which is run by a founder owner who makes all the decisions in the company. Folks who have been through lean training will probably remember the story of Sheila. Sheila was a person who in one company, she wasn't the owner, but she was someone in the hierarchy of the company through whom all decisions had to run. Every little thing had to come across Sheila's desk. Sheila had to make the decision. So in lean terms, that's called a Sheila box. And when you draw it on a value stream map, you'll see that all the information flows through this choke point, Sheila, and flows back out again. So if Sheila gets the sniffles, nothing's getting done. Okay. That's one extreme, one person making all the decisions. The other extreme is everybody making decisions. All employees getting to make decisions at their level. Okay? And so if we visualize that spectrum of empowerment from many to one, now we can start grading our cultures for where they fall along that spectrum. You know, and not many of them are going to be where, you know, where the unfortunately where everyone can make decisions relative to their job, and hopefully very few of them will be Sheila boxes, right? Where only one person gets to make all the decisions, and then we'll have most of the rest falling in between. In order to capture this within Culture is Everything, I recommend that we adopt a tool that's used within failure mode and effects analysis. It's a very common quality risk management tool where we try to anticipate what goes wrong with a process or a product, and we try to quantify it, take that qualitative information and quantify it somehow so we can prioritize risk mitigation efforts, reduce risk of things going wrong, make better products, better processes. Failure mode and effects analysis. Okay. They use an objective scale to categorize that spectrum that we were just talking about. So once you define your endpoints, then we further define what we're talking about so that we can plot within those endpoints some additional conditions. And what I mean by that is, picture a 5-point scale. You see an example here, ranging from low to high, representing where 1 and 5 represent the extremes that we were talking about on those spectrums. We then have a definition as cut and dried as we can make it. I like to make mine based on easily observed behavior whenever I can, so that it's super easy to score. Okay? And you just kind of build it out this way. So in the example of our decision makers, right? We say that 5 is where employees at the lowest level of organizational hierarchy are fully empowered to stop production, satisfy customers, employ company resources, and manage risk at their discretion. 4, supervisors and above are fully empowered to stop production, satisfy customers, employ company resources, and manage risk at their discretion. So we can see here that now we're talking about not lowest level employees, but one level up from that. 3, managers and above are fully empowered. Similar language, managers and above. 2, junior executives. Finally, 1, senior executives. So that's a pretty good encapsulation of that spectrum, because you can see that we're talking about different layers within the organization and who gets to make the decision, with the implication being that if the senior level executives are making all the decisions, you've got something that looks like a Sheila box, and if the employees on the floor are making all the decisions, then you got something that looks a little bit like a fully empowered operation. So that's how we flesh out these dimensions from those 6 questions that we asked. In this case, who makes decisions? That's the objective scale for answering that question for a given organization, a given culture. And we have 5 more. The next block up I call decisive information. By that I mean is, what's the bit of information that tends to be the difference maker in the terms of a decision that the organization makes? Okay? And the range here basically is between data and experience, gut and numbers. Okay? So in some organizations, especially those where data is hard to come by or very expensive or both, you tend to make decisions more based on your experience and your gut. In organizations where you have well-presented, easily consumed near real-time data that's relevant to the task at hand, that's the other extreme, right? Is we tend to make those decisions based on data. We tend to hesitate to make decisions until the data's in and we understand and consume it. Okay. And then you have kind of a balance between in the middle. Okay. Decision authority. So this comes down to basically tiebreakers. Is, let's say I've got two executives. One, both of them are armed with facts and data in support of the decision that they want to make. The recommendations are contradictory. Okay, they're opposed to one another. One says do this, the other one says don't do that. Okay. So we're asking here, what really settles the tie? Is it the more credible decision maker? So in other words, somebody who's got a better track record of being right helps determine the tie? Or is it the one who has the most positional authority? So it comes down to, Amy's wrong all the time, but Amy is a senior vice president, and Rob, who is right all the time, is a junior vice president, and therefore we're going to go with Amy. Okay, that's one extreme. The other extreme says, look, Rob's right all the time. We're going to go with Rob over Amy. So two different extremes, and in the middle, you have some sort of balance. Sometimes we go with Rob, sometimes we go with Amy. Those are the three dimensions that are associated with the first question: how are decisions made? And in terms of what probably works best for most quality implementations, you want to be in a situation where people are empowered, a situation where data informs decisions more than gut, and a situation where credibility counts more than positional authority. That generally is more conducive to success in the quality improvement space. Okay. We like to think of it as a marketplace of ideas where the best idea wins, irrespective of the person who is putting forth that idea. Let's talk a little bit on the change front, pace of change. So the spectrum for pace of change, now that you're familiar with how these scales kind of work, the extremes for this one: 5, employees expect core job functions to change more frequently than once a month. So, weekly, bi-weekly, daily in some cases, we've got a change coming all the time. That'd be one extreme. Not necessarily the best extreme from a quality point of view. We like to have a little more stability than that, but one extreme. Second one, employees expect core job functions to change less frequently than once a year. So extremely infrequent change, probably only out of strict necessity. In terms of pace of change, that's how we've kind of painted the picture in terms of the amount of time that tends to go between changes. Magnitude of change. The majority of employees embrace major changes in the company's products, services, policies, processes, and strategies. So this basically means that people are so used to major change that they just accept it. This is most typical probably of folks who are used to working in a startup environment which is experiencing high growth. Things are changing all the time. People's jobs roles are shifting, everyone's scrambling to cover more. One day you come in and you're handling all the customer service issues that come over the email, and then the next thing you're going out and you're setting up the operation so that you can mail out small parcels to fulfill orders. Totally different things. Very normal for a startup kind of environment, right? All right, the other extreme. The majority of employees resist minor changes in the company's products, services, policies, processes, and strategies. Any amount of change, no matter how small, you can bet will be resisted. This tends to be low growth, Very stable, very well-established companies is where you'll see that type of extreme. And then finally, we've got what drives the change. This is where I was talking about the internal versus the external, right? Change originates with the employees who perform the work, versus change originates with market, regulatory, supply chain, or customer pressures. So what really causes us to undertake that change in the end? I worked for one company where me and my industrial engineers, we were all located for 90 days on a deployment within a distribution center. And we were allowed to kind of go take data and talk about things conceptually for most of that first time, but we weren't allowed to change anything. And then the warehouse manager called us out to the floor because they had a customer that was so disgruntled they were about to lose that customer. And we had been talking about how we felt that the root of their problems lay in the way that they were releasing their orders. They were basically at the start of the shift releasing everything that had to be picked from that warehouse that day all at once. So what was happening was, everybody kind of rockets out. They haven't had time to replenish the area so that they could pick it efficiently. And so they would go out, they would find that into their bulk areas of the warehouse, they would find that things weren't where they were supposed to be. They would have to kind of scramble to find, they would break into cases, go out to the dock and get things, all sorts of very inefficient things that would kind of slow them down they would have to do just by nature of the fact that they released everything all at once. So our recommendation was, let's release it in batches tied to the actual trucks going out. So we'd be working on the 7:30 p.m. truck before the midnight truck and picking that material accordingly. And by working in smaller batches, as any lean practitioner will tell you, reduces a lot of waste. It helps you go faster, and it helps you get better because you're not missing things due to the vast amount of material that may be hitting the dock or the truck at one time. Okay, so we were finally invited to give that smaller batch size improvement a try, simply because they were about to lose a customer. That's what forced the issue. So that is a company where the change was mainly externally driven. Okay, not very conducive for the kind of quality work that we do. One of the implications of having an empowered team is that they are able to make small changes without it having to be kind of a letter from the CEO in order to get people to do things. So those are the 6 dimensions that I would argue are core to any cultural readiness for any quality improvement methodology. Like I say, in some cases, some methodologies are better suited to certain scores on those scales than others. But these are the things that you want to look at in order to determine, are you really ready to make some inroads in quality? If the culture doesn't line up very well with quality in general or the particular quality approach that you're trying, that's where we want to start doing our gap analysis and figuring out how we can either fix our quality method to take better advantage of the culture as it is, or to start changing that culture to make it more conducive to the quality approach that we want to use. Okay, so let me give you one more real-world example on this. We've talked about lean implementations before. Let me switch gears a little bit and talk about Six Sigma. I'm a Six Sigma Master Black Belt. I got my start, as so many did, with GE back in the 90s. Working up through the ranks of Six Sigma. There's a series of ranks based on kind of martial arts belts, if you will, associated with Six Sigma, but I got my green belt, got my black belt, got my master black belt. Okay? And now years later, Six Sigma really got jump-started in earnest around 1996. So now we're looking at some 24, 25 years later, and the question comes around all the time in our community, has Six Sigma failed? If so, why did Six Sigma fail? And generally speaking, when you look at Six Sigma through the lens of these 6 dimensions that we just talked about, in order for Six Sigma to be truly successful, in order for the environment to be fully conducive for Six Sigma, then what you probably are looking at is you need to have a situation where your decision makers are generally not all the way down at the floor level, probably more at the supervisor manager level. You're looking for a situation where data wins all the time, because Six Sigma, implied in the name of it, it's a statistically based approach. We train a lot of people on doing some fairly serious math, because we want them to be able to analyze data well. So basically data has to win all the time. When you talk about decision making, it's got to be credibility based. Doesn't matter who you are, matters what you know and how right you are, how good you are with the tools. When we talk about change of pace, Six Sigma is, because it's statistically based, the implication is that you have standard work. So that means that you've got kind of a core process that's stable in terms of statistical process control, right? So that means the pace of change should probably be on the lower end. Certainly you want to change more than once a year most of the time, but not much more than that. Magnitude of change. You should not be seeing large-scale changes. They should be relatively small. We do have design for Six Sigma as a methodology when you're doing something new, new product, new process, what have you. But in general, we should be talking smaller incremental changes here. The process should already be very good in terms of quality, and we're just trying to make it a little bit better, right? And then for the driver of change in a Six Sigma context is probably going to be in the middle of the road. So while we have kind of an army of green belts out there, we do advise that in order to have maximum impact on the organization, that a lot of our proposed changes through Six Sigma be more cross-functional, and that's generally at a higher pay grade than your typical shop floor kind of employee. And so when you ask why has Six Sigma not taken root as widely, I would say probably because the cultures where we've deployed Six Sigma have not matched that profile. In an upcoming video, we're going to talk about more of these archetypes, but in this video I just wanted to expose you to the kind of thinking that goes into the development of those archetypes. In this case, what would make the best culture for Six Sigma. Thank you, and have a great day.